Yes, thank you. And I'm going to connect to Kathleen's talk by saying that among the ESOL teachers that I know, they do what I'm about to recommend, which is reading across the curriculum. And because they're trying to build vocabulary, conceptual knowledge, familiarity with the broadest spectrum of experience in reading that there is. Sometimes that happens less in the other subjects, and that's going to be the topic of my talk. So reading in the content areas is an important but often neglected focus of literacy concerns. After teaching the mechanics of reading in early grades and remediation at other levels, graded readers, unfortunately in some schools, take over with their companion workbooks and bells and whistles and these programs that are part of sort of language arts. They are quite expensive often and often limit the range of reading materials in the classroom. Math, history, science, or art teachers should be as attentive to literacy skills as to content in classroom instruction. It's common to believe that literacy instruction is solely the charge of language arts teachers, but it should not be so, particularly because what we're trying to do is prepare students for a life of reading. Adolescents entering the adult world in the 21st century will read and write more than at any other time in human history. And indeed, we used to teach keyboarding, which is such a joke nowadays that we would have spent time taking the kids into a lab and teaching them keyboarding. I still can't text with my thumbs, but anyway. So they will be needing advanced levels of literacy to perform their jobs, run their household, act as citizens, and even conduct their personal lives. The range of decisions we have to make through reading in how we conduct, whether we recycle or we don't, whether we believe in climate change, we don't, whether who we vote for, all of those things require really extensive literacy skills. So there have been some advances and there have been some setbacks. And the new Common Core standards for English emphasize increased use of nonfiction text and less literature. But this demand should neither shortchange inclusion of good literature nor transfer the burden of instruction in content area reading skills to language arts. The emphasis, unfortunately, on reading and math in the elementary program was a very strong outcome of No Child Left Behind legislation in the late 90s. It's still having residual effects today. And what that essentially did was to sidetrack what was a very excellent development in the mid-1990s when the national standards in the various subject areas really brought out what one can do between K and 6 and all the way K through 12, and broke these down in very important ways that related to upgrading those content areas from sort of fact-based to creating structures for greater meaning. What happened then when, just as that was getting geared up and there was much more professional development beginning to go on, especially at the elementary level, in having strategies for teaching better, science and social studies are just two examples. Suddenly the focus on math reading, actually even in the trying to achieve proficiency, some schools almost eliminated those subjects where they already were kind of struggling. So this was kind of the sad thing, and it narrowed the focus away from these, which were already not maybe having their full due that they should have. The solution or the problem, part of that is the way that teachers are trained. Many universities have abandoned the idea of sort of an elementary education program, and you have to have a major, and then you go back to do teacher training and teacher certification programs. But unless someone has come up through a specific subject area, often they feel that their own knowledge in that area is inadequate to teaching, especially again at the elementary level, because once you get to middle school, there are people who have degrees at least in one of the sciences or one of the fields of say, social studies or music or whatever it happens to be. So I know there's one series that you can buy. It's called Stop Faking It, on how to teach science for elementary. They're actually very good books, and I myself am a sort of aspirational science teacher. I've always tried to incorporate those things, and so I've relied a few times on the Stop Faking It series because they really work. They're very experiential. So we already know what it takes to achieve this kind of literacy. We've also heard it from both of our colleagues from the earliest level and then with English language learners. A reader who has reached advanced literacy is able to engage in the 4 literacy skills, to make sense of and engage in advanced reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And that is to say academically and in everyday life as well. So, of course, comprehension of a text is made up of smaller pieces that have to come together in harmony, and my colleague Kathleen just laid out very much how that happens. And also she illustrated how that can happen in using novels and using poetry, and I'm sure that she also engaged very much with sort of content area type of reading. So it's, discussing and having students, if you don't know something, don't be afraid to ask what is that word, and it often opens up, as she saw, really excellent discussions as well. So one of the real keys to understanding, and one of the problems that upper level teachers have in say even from middle school, is that students have not acquired the background knowledge that they need by the time they get to middle school, by the time they reach the point in high school where you're checking off your dance card for college, finish this course, finish that course, finish the other. And we have many students who simply cannot keep up because they have, in those first 6 years, have not acquired the background knowledge that will help them to understand and hook together all these complex concepts that they're now getting from a teacher who's trained in a particular field. And the course load of content becomes quite rigorous. So the idea of acquiring background knowledge, gaining interest in the topic and not fear of it, vocabulary skills, and the ability to make inferences and judgments are all required. So we have, I won't bother to go over these, but we know the sort of basic content strategies for reading instruction in the curriculum, such as read alouds and different charts, graphic organizers, vocabulary instruction, and so on, and writing to learn. And particularly reciprocal teaching is one that I'm very much favor, where if a student has been able to teach something to someone else, they have acquired that knowledge, at least in part. And if the student who they're discussing with has also done it, then they can put together things in a kind of jigsaw manner. So teaching these reading strategies, or teaching through these reading strategies, should not be an add-on. It's like when we talked about, we need critical thinking, so suddenly critical thinking workbooks emerged. We're supposed to now take time out and do these things. They really should be fully integrated into the subjects that we're teaching, and not thought of as an additional burden or another silo that we have to add to the many silos that we have. And when, of course, the skill development is left to language arts in textbook series for language arts, we lose a lot. And what I have experienced many times is that when reading in the content area began to dawn as something that would be done aside from sort of more social language literature types of things, the textbook publishers, as a marketing method, kind of stuck in these random reading selections that honestly had very little or nothing to do with what the student was engaging with in those subjects, whether science or social studies, at that grade level. So then what you would have is that the reading selections there, where some skills development was applied, didn't transfer over, and in those subject area courses, students would be reading these dense textbooks. And text is probably some of the worst type of text. I don't know if you engage with trying to deconstruct, even 2 paragraphs of a history textbook, where you've torn out all of the writer's opinion, perspective. It's in there, but you have to really hunt it down. Generalizations one after the other, unsupported by any sort of notes. So it's like academic reading boiled down to a thick tarry mass that's almost impenetrable. So having done this kind of reading instruction in the language arts course, and then turning to these textbooks to try to get something out of the subject areas just does not work. So many teachers have turned to topic books as a better way to do it. One of my favorites, if I were to show you some slides, is the children's book about the saguaro cactus. and what all goes on in it, and the animals that live in it and that feed off of it and, you know, fly to it and leave and so on and so forth. Is a really good example. One other excellent way to do it is a series that came up it started to be developed in the late 90s from the National Geographic Society, just when the brouhaha about no, we don't want national standards was emerging. Basically, National Geographic opened its school publishing division and or at least beefed it up a great deal and said, you know, never mind all this debate. And they began to create a series called Reading Expeditions and Windows on Literacy, which were across the curriculum keyed to the rubrics and content of national standards in science, in the sciences, not just in science in general, in the major sciences, in civics, history, economics, and so on. And not only did they do that, but they paired the materials that they produced that you could literally use, and we did in the school I was working in at the time. We used them for a fully integrated curriculum across the subject areas, where they were backed up by and supported by materials for teaching reading in the content area. So reading and writing, really, really excellent tools for engagement. So what does this require, though, to be able to pull this off? We were fortunate to have the freedom, which skillful teachers need to enjoy creative autonomy and curriculum development, to use a variety of reading material outside the textbook or instead of the textbook, or use textbooks only very selectively to make the content interesting and to build skills. One other thing that we did, which I know we have several Muslim school principals and educators here in the room, we had the freedom to create a modular schedule, and we used this for many purposes, one of which was the perennial problem of we're teaching Arabic and students come in at different Arabic levels. Mathematics, also students advance at different levels. Doesn't matter, you know, you may as well sort them by their shoe size as by, you know, their age level when it comes to their facility. So what we did was we block scheduled the subject areas throughout the week and always left at least a 2-hour block usually in the late morning. They're already awake but not yet, right? And that was the time when students rotated in and out of those periods when they needed graded instructions, particularly in Arabic. They could be grouped, and during that time they would help each other in math. So they were teaching each other math or advancing on their own, and we were very pleased to know that they did that. And that time was used freely by the students to engage with reading in the content areas, reading, writing, processing, and all of that. So when we did instruction in science or social studies, whichever subfield it happened to be, they knew that they had the time to really sit down and read and process with each other, in addition to whatever they were doing at home. And this worked really magnificently. It solved like about 10 problems at one time. And there you had that block. And they felt really, during that time, those students felt like they were in charge of their learning. They were in the driver's seat, and they could decide what they were going to do as long as they kept up with what they were doing. And I saw how the students also engaged with each other's reading. And we used, among other things, we used those topic books and the internet quite extensively, the materials that we brought in from there. So, how's my time doing? 5. Okay, that's good. I'll be able to wrap up. So for this to have this kind of thing to happen, that's not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on this particular school and setting and all of those other things. But the bottom line is that in order to engage this kind of reading across the curriculum and reading instruction and students in charge of their own learning, teachers need support from school administrators, librarians, and reading specialists to implement what we know in the classroom within an integrated curriculum that gives sufficient time to the content areas. And I'm particularly vehement about the elementary grades, because if they have not built up that background reading that we know is important for understanding, and that conceptual framework, as well as the curiosity and interest and fascination, without the fear that comes when, you know, I've got biology, you know, and they're shaking in their boots. Because what happens from middle school on, if we haven't already lost them by 5th grade, in the case of some of our young gentlemen, is their skeletons on the caravan trail. They can't keep up. with the subject areas. So it becomes a class, you know, for the 5, 6, or 10 kids, you know, who can manage this. We can remediate that. There's no reason why we can't, but it really should be done in the lower grades, so that by the time they came up, they're fascinated and they're ready, and they have that background that helps them to understand. So I know many adults, I mean, we could talk about a number of different issues here, but the fact that human beings today are called upon to understand and make sensible decisions about a wide range of issues based on absorption of a fast-moving stream of information, it isn't surprising that we now have the problems of fake news and the denial of fact-based, research-based scientific issues. This points to a long-standing lack of broad-based literacy and over-specialization and tracking of students into you know, one field or another. So for too many adults, their time as students did not provide an integrated understanding of the subjects they studied, at least partly because of compartmentalization and overuse of textbooks as content providers. And I won't even get started on multiple choice testing. So, good use of a variety of reading material in an integrated manner can be an efficient use of time that enhances student learning in focused ways. We were able to get through an enormous amount of content by integrating the curriculum, by using reading across the content areas to enhance the amount of time we were actually spending on those subjects, and it just simply was more efficient than, you know, first teach this, then close your books, now open the books to this. It allowed, again, that ownership of learning that's so important to students. So it should be part of, reading in the content area should be part of an efficient, integrated curriculum that emphasizes engaging reading in all subjects, has students working on processing text individually and in groups. And the days, of course, as we've heard here, and we'll hear again until we're done here, the days of thinking you can just hand students a text and they'll come back after doing their homework and be fully, you know, prepared to discuss it, we all have would be disabused of that idea. So research has uncovered a wide variety of effective scaffolding strategies for pre, during, and after reading, such as previewing text, reading for purpose, making predictions and connections. We've heard all of those wonderful things, and it's, you know, it's very, very solidly backed up with research. So this will support all our students, not just struggling readers and English learners. And most important, we'll be making habitual, skilled readers with wide background knowledge, a store of concepts and vocabulary that will serve them well as lifelong learners.